It was late afternoon when Rachel and Ethan arrived at the old house on Hollow Hill. The neighbourhood had an eerie silence with overgrown trees and houses that seemed to hold their breath. They'd found the house online, a charming, rustic home with a history. It was far too cheap for the size and location, but they had brushed off any concerns. This was their dream, a new start after the chaos of the city. The house stood at the end of the street, surrounded by dense woods. The moment they stepped inside, a chill ran down Rachel's spine, but she ignored it. The air was musty, filled with the scent of damp wood and something else, something she couldn't quite place. Ethan, ever the optimist, was already envisioning the renovations. As they settled in, strange things began to happen. At first it was minor, a door creaking open when no one was near, lights flickering despite the brand new bulbs. Ethan dismissed it as the quirks of an old house, but Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. One night, while unpacking, Rachel found a dusty old journal hidden in a corner. The pages were yellowed, filled with the frantic scrawls of a previous owner. It spoke of shadows that moved on their own, whispers that came from nowhere, and a warning. Rachel showed Ethan, but he laughed it off, calling it a prank or the ramblings of a disturbed mind. He didn't notice the way the shadows seemed to stretch towards them, or how the whispers grew louder at night. Rachel began to hear her name softly at first, but then more insistently, echoing through the halls. The nights grew worse. They heard footsteps in the attic, even though it was empty. The taps would turn on by themselves, flooding the bathroom with icy water. Once, Rachel woke to find muddy footprints leading from the front door to their bedroom, footprints that weren't theirs. Ethan started to change too. He became distant, his eyes darker, his face gaunt. He'd spent hours staring at the walls, muttering to himself. When Rachel confronted him, he'd snap out of it, confused and disoriented, unable to remember what he was doing. Rachel tried to convince Ethan to leave, but he refused. "This is our home," he insisted, his voice cold and unfamiliar. "We can't leave now." One evening, after another sleepless night, Rachel decided she'd had enough. She packed a bag and tried to leave, but the front door wouldn't budge. The windows were sealed shut, and her phone had no signal. Panic set in as she realized the house was trapping them. Ethan was nowhere to be found, and the whispers had turned into a deafening roar. The walls seemed to close in around her, the house groaning as if it were alive. In her frantic search for Ethan, Rachel stumbled upon a hidden basement, the door blending seamlessly with the wall. She descended the creaking stairs, finding herself in a room filled with old, rotting furniture and cobweb-covered trinkets. In the center of the room stood Ethan, his back turned to her, staring at a mirror. As Rachel approached, she saw Ethan's reflection in the mirror. His eyes strange, his face twisted in a sinister grin. He began to speak in a voice that wasn't his own, a deep, guttural tone that sent shivers down her spine. "Welcome, Rachel. We've been waiting for you." Suddenly, the basement door slammed shut behind her. The walls began to pulse, the air growing thick with the stench of decay. Ethan turned to her, his body moving unnaturally as if controlled by invisible strings. Rachel screamed and ran, but the house had other plans. The floorboards splintered, and hands, skeletal and decayed, emerged from the walls, grabbing at her, pulling her down. The whispers became laughter, mocking her futile attempts to escape. She reached the stairs, but Ethan was there, blocking her path, his face twisted in a grotesque mask of rage. "You can't leave, Rachel. You belong to the house now." In a last, desperate attempt, Rachel shoved Ethan aside and raced up the stairs. The house seemed to shake with anger, the walls cracking and splintering. She reached the front door, and with a strength she didn't know she had, she tore it open and ran out into the night. But as soon as she crossed the threshold, she felt a sharp pain in her chest. She looked down to see a handprint, black and seared, pressed into her skin. She collapsed on the porch, the last thing she saw being the house. its windows glowing with an unnatural light. Ethan's laughter echoed in her ears as the darkness consumed her. The next morning, the neighborhood was quiet again. The house on Hollow Hill stood silent, its windows dark and lifeless. A for sale sign swung gently in the breeze as if nothing had happened. Inside, the house was still. The walls had repaired themselves, the whispers had ceased. But in the basement, two new figures had joined the others in the mirror, Rachel and Ethan, their faces forever frozen in terror. The house on Hollow Hill waited, as it always did, for its next victims. And in the quiet of the night, if you listened closely, you could hear the faintest of whispers calling out, inviting you in.